project, but we have been working on other data sets, such as on human skeletal material. So I was working with a colleague who's a human anthropologist, and he's very interested in slightly odd burials and skeletons. So he was down in Cornwall on holiday and visited the Witchcraft Museum, I think it was in Boscastle or Bute, and he came across this skull, and it just looked odd. So when he was inquiring about it, he explained what he did, and they said, "Oh, take it away and run some tests on it if you want." And basically, we radiocarbon dated it, and we also took some skin samples as well, because the skin had been sort of preserved, but it was covered in some material. So we analysed that, and it turned out it was some tar. So the actual skin had been preserved under tar. We radiocarbon dated, as I said, from some sacking which had been incorporated underneath the tar as well. And I laser scanned it as well. And we also CT scanned this skull. I 3D printed it, and essentially the skull turned out to be from the tar was sourced to Egypt. It was radiocarbon dated to one of the dynasties, so Egyptian dynasties. So it's actually evidence of mummification, which we've got, and somehow it ended up in London, and then got sold on down to Cornwall. So yes, we are 3D printing. We haven't 3D printed any of these, but we'd love to. It's just a case of getting the data sets together and running the process, really.
I thought it would be really good for having touchable exhibits in museums, especially if you're able to restore them. You have Nero going from a boy to a man.
As a timeline almost. Yeah. So yeah, you can see the development. Yeah, it's something we'd like to look at. Obviously, some of the ones which are 2.5 life size times life size will be slightly challenging, but we can scale them down, I suppose.
I think once you've got the three-dimensional image in our hands, you can better see the damage. You can better see all that sort of post-mortem things across the face without actually having to handle the real artifacts. So the real artifact's been handled just once, and we've scanned it, but then we've got a sort of a teaching research resource. So it's something we need to look into, isn't it?
Yeah. So at the university, we've sort of teamed up with people from the designing and computing department. So our two schools are sort of merged together. So we're already sort of developing links, and they've got a 3D printer, and they can print fairly large objects, but they do it for rapid prototyping. It's almost how the original laser scanner was designed for. So they have objects which they want to prototype, and so they print them out just as a rough format. But the detail from these printers are fantastic. Really, really, it's about 5mm, I think, or less. So you can actually really get a clear understanding of what the original objects would have looked like. So it's as I say, it's something which we need to explore. It's on the list.
Could you tell us a bit more about the identification process, how you get from your 3D image to the recognition that it matches the images that you have?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, because this is really a pilot survey for a bigger project, we wanted to show it was possible to scan these images really quickly. We've done partial work in the British Museum, which has got a fantastic archive of more complete Roman statuary, and also in Petworth House and Wilton House, which is in Wiltshire, which is stately homes which have got basically sculptures which were taken from Italy and North Africa during the Grand Tour in the 18th and 19th century. All the aristocrats sent their children out to Europe, and they came back with sort of crates and crates full of Roman sculptures. We haven't been able to do very much so far. So at the moment, basically all the big museums of Europe have got a fantastic photographic archive of statues. Britain hasn't. So we didn't want to just photograph ours and compare it with what's known from other museums. So what we've done, part of the work is when we've done the scan, we can then match it up exactly with the photograph and change the lighting across the scan so it matches completely with that, and then do the assessment from that. We've been sort of playing around with, there's a whole series of sort of forensic or work that's done with the police, identifying key characteristics in faces, position of the eyes, nose, mouth, and so on. That's what we really want to try and do as well. We need more scans, really, of images in museums across Europe. But at the moment, until we've finished the pilot survey, once we've done that, we can start applying for money and going out to do that, because I really want to go to Italy and start looking through the museum. So at the moment, it's changing the way we've got the scan to fit the photographs. It's not an ideal way of doing it, but it's certainly the best way. And it's from that we've got these results.
I think what it also does as well, with the scanned data, we can show it to other people who haven't had access to the archive before. And it just kind of opens up or makes the data a lot more accessible, so other experts can look at it and say, oh, okay, oh, you think it's that, but have you considered this? And then sometimes the light bulb goes off and think, oh, okay, yeah. And then you can look for more examples and tee them up. So rather than just going from 2 flat photographs and saying no, 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 possibly no, 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 yes, it actually becomes a lot more more tuned process, really. You can actually begin to sort of look at different theories and so on and examine it in a lot more detail.
So would it perhaps make it easier if you have a scan of the, let's say, of some of the images that you're comparing it to? So you have a few that can, I don't know.
Yeah, so no,
emperors in the same
so
period.
clearly identifiable ones
Yeah.
out in Italy.
Because now you're comparing it to pictures, so you have like the same problem.
Yeah. So we would ideally like to go out and scan
Reference.
portraits, as a reference collection, and then compare our damaged or fragmented objects to that. I mean, obviously they might be displayed slightly differently, designed to be viewed from different perspectives, but some of the same characteristics will be there across the board. So it's something we'd like to do.
Because it's obviously not a problem that's just specific to Britain. There are museums all over Europe, and indeed in the States, which have got fragmentary portraits. So you just get a chin or an eye, and it just gets ignored. But once you've got a three-dimensional database, the idea was really once to set that up that other museums could use, so that it could then try and identify their fragments and see who they've actually got in their collection.
It could also go, if you have a huge reference collection, it could make it much easier. It could even go almost automatically, like just by a program giving you a few suggestions.
Absolutely, yes. We were very keen to put it up on the internet to make it freely accessible, so that everyone can have use of it. But it's time at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. And the laser scanning really is a quick part of this process.
Yeah.
Actually, there's an awful lot of work trawling through these indexes and inventories, just looking at photographs, effectively, which Miles does. I don't have to do in his spare time. But I mean, that sort of data collection is in a sense, you're just going through and then contacting the owners of the collections, the stately homes, and so on, and then going to do the scan. So the scanning is a quick bit. Essentially, there's a lot of hard graft before we even get to that stage. Round of applause.
Any tried using facial recognition sort of stuff to try and identify them quicker? So if you've got the scans and photos stuff, you can make it.
We haven't yet, but it's something we're keen to go on. I mean, I'm not sure how well it's going to work on fragmentary remains.
I'll give you that list of 5 possible.
Yeah, what we'd really need to have is a group of certain complete scans, and then pull out from that key characteristics, a bit like you see in CSI or something, and then apply that to partials or unknowns. So you need to get a really secure data set to begin with, and then sort of work from there. But really, what we, as part of the pilot project, we just wanted to sort of demonstrate the technique and say, actually, this is a big question which we need to develop further, which we're beginning to do, I think.
Slowly but surely.
Presumably the sculptors would have been working with a copy of a copy of Nero. So there must be quite a lot of variation in the facial features when scanning the sculpture.
There doesn't. I mean, the unfortunate thing is the processes of how a portrait type is developed from Rome and then spread out to the provinces is not very well known. But there does seem to be, there's a fantastic uniformity of image right the way across. There seems to be an idea that as soon as the emperor is put, I almost said elected, they're not elected, is made emperor, is put on the throne, or an heir apparent is identified, that image gets disseminated fairly swiftly to all the key urban centres around around the Roman Empire, and it's vital that it is a representation or a realistic image. So there are sometimes subtle variations which might relate to the skill of the sculptor, but the key positions of the eyes, and certainly the hair. The hair is almost the distinctive aspect of most of them, because they each seem to, it becomes almost like a badge of identity, the way in which the fringe is parted, the way in which the hair's combed at the back of the head, or they get little sort of sideburns. And once you've got those, and thankfully with the Nero portraits that we've got, like these examples, the hair's been untouched, because it's the face they've tried to batter. And once we've got the hair, and we can identify where the eyes are sitting, and then the relative position of nose and mouth is really actually quite a secondary thing. We've got the hair, we can identify the person from that.
And these are official portraits as well, so the official images.
Yes.
So it'd be hard to imagine quite poor representation being tolerated. So,
and most of them are marble, so we're presuming they are being manufactured in Italy and then being exported out. So, do you want to?
I was just thinking about like how modern perception, treatment of archaeology, the past and artefacts affects how we understand the past. And I wondered if this is an example of people, the way that they've been sort of kept back in museum collections is yes an example of how people deem artefacts to be significant or not significant based on how they look. But is it a bit of a ploy to sort of remove us a bit from the Roman Empire because we don't generally want to perceive we were part of it like that? Do you think
I don't know, do we?
part of it? Well, I wonder if that has played a part in why people haven't so much.
I think it's probably more that they don't look very attractive to some
These
minds.
days.
I think we're so used to seeing perfect, well sculptured pieces. It's like these sculptures, when they were originally created, they would have been painted. So there's a sense of realism that we're missing. That eyes are painted, hair's colour, lips, they look a bit like something out of Las Vegas. They look a bit sort of tacky and horrible. But we don't recreate that on the images. Even if there's an example, there's one of Caligula and there's one of Claudius in Copenhagen Museum, and the paint's still there, but they haven't attempted to replicate that to show what it looked, because to modern minds it doesn't look right. We're used to white, clean marble, full stop.
It's based on perception of what is considered kind of significant and beautiful and useful.
Yeah, I think it's a wholly sort of modern perception. I think it really goes back to the 18th century. We perceive what classical art and archaeology is like, and we don't like being told it's different. So we wouldn't like to see something like that painted, and perhaps something like that doesn't go on display because it's a battered head. And do people want to see it? I would argue that they should see it because it is important, and its current state of preservation is really sort of irrelevant. It is a statue of the emperor that would have been in an important place. It might have been removed after his downfall, or it might have been part of the Boudiccan revolt. It is an important story, and it shouldn't just be in a box in a dark cellar forgotten. It should be out on display with a...
I think what they show in sense of like human behaviour and actions delivered out of anger and...
Yeah, and as I said halfway through the lecture,
That's the most interesting part, is why they were battered.
it's really relevant now. I mean, only today there's reports of statues of Lenin being toppled and people trying to protect it. It's a real sort of raw emotion. Some people feel it's part of their heritage, some people feel it's a symbol of oppression. It would have been the same with these as well.
The
So,
fact that people felt that passionate, even in kind of Bristol as part of the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
shows how integrated we were actually.
absolutely.
Which is really significant.
All this distance from Rome, we're not saying Nero who. There's actually a sense of destroy him, he's a monster, bury him. So
Do you think, I mean, in terms of how they felt about it, do you think they were able to separate out the kind of the taboo of what that statue represented and used it in a building? Do you think they were able to kind of... Because I wondered if they hated it that much, wouldn't they just have wanted to just discard it and never use it ever again? But the fact it's okay to reuse it obviously meant that they kind of decided it was still okay. Do you know what I mean?
well, I'm not sure. I mean,
Doesn't carry any kind of...
the one at Fishbourne isn't. I mean, it's been reused, but it's not on display. It's in the foundation, so
Which is
it's.
significant.
It is, but it's another way of burying it. You're treading on it
But they're
effectively every
able to
day.
recycle it, I suppose, aren't they?
Yeah, but I mean, the question is, I suppose the rest of the statue might have been recycled. They might have put another head on it, and the fact that
even
was
more damage.
yeah, it is. But the fact that survived, the body and torso survived, it's now lost to us because it presumably was weathered, it decayed. The fact they've taken the head off and buried it means that's preserved.
But
So
you
there's the
could do a
irony.
project trying to find all the limbs.
I'm not sure we'd ever succeed. But it's rather ironic that in trying to bury the head and consign it to oblivion, they preserved it in the archaeological record and we found it, whereas the rest of the body's gone. And it's those heads that will probably stayed on display, which are no longer here. So, yeah. Sorry.
I know with regards to sort of answering the conundrum of whether or not it was I still call it overseer, or whether or not it was sort of defamation. Would it be possible? I know it's limestone and it's been 2,000 years, but would it be possible to get some sort of classical weapon expert to see whether or not the bludgeon marks within which have been used would be whether or not there'd be evidence, because there's going to be a difference between an Iceni weapon and sort of Roman weapon. Would you reckon that would be a possibility to identify?
It's certainly a possibility, and now we've obviously got a 3D scan, especially if we can get a 3D print out of it, then it may be possible to look at the actual signature of the blade as it struck there. Of course, the difficulty is that in the instance like of the Boudiccan or Boadiccan revolt, depending on your pronunciation, people might have picked up anything to hand. So it might just be an axe, it might be a Roman sword. We know that thousands of Romans died, so it might be difficult to actually say precisely what did it, but you should be able to say whether it's an axe or an adze or a sword. I suspect it's probably an axe, because that's going to create the result. A sword's more likely to break or buckle in striking it off. So it might be an axe, but that's certainly something that we haven't had a chance to do yet, is to actually look at the signature mark, and also you might be to see whether it's one person and one implement who's doing all the damage, in which case it's not a frenzied mob. It might just be one sort of citizen who's taken a delight to the statue. And if you've got 5 or 6 different types, then it does suggest that it's being toppled and there's loads of people smacking it, hammering it and destroying it. So that is certainly another thing we can do, but it's something we haven't done as yet, I'm afraid.
I'm really fascinated by, I think it's your reference to devices museums. I mentioned kind of in the break, family from kind of Wiltshire. But we've ended up with so much kind of data effectively kind of tucked away in all sorts of places, as you've mentioned, and some of the sites that you've been to. Has there at sort of some point in our more recent history, in the last kind of couple of 100 years, an interest and fascination of, tucking these sorts of exhibits away? Could they be hidden away in other places that haven't been categorised and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, the more museums, we haven't contacted all the museums in Britain yet, but the more we've contacted, the more we've gone sort of, actually, yeah, we've got something downstairs, you might know.
Do people know necessarily what they've got, or do they see a kind of head that's quite weathered?
Well, yeah, I mean, they know they've got a head, but they don't know quite what to do with it. I mean, the trouble is, with the really big one from Boston up in the top corner, it's immense. It's a huge weight. And quite a scale, so actually trying to put it somewhere originally, it just gets in the way. So there's a feeling, well, just hide it downstairs. There's the one which is, where's that one there from? There's one from Devices. It looks quite small in that picture, but that's almost 2.5 to 3 times life size. And they argued that to actually get it in the museum, they need floor supports, they need reinforcement. So it's better just leave it in the cellar and pretend it's not there really, and just sort of ignore it. But only the other day I had an email from Worthing Museum where they've got a sculpted head. It's not in the stores or on display, it's actually up in their office. They use it as a paperweight. And it's sort of, and they showed me a photograph and it looks like another 1st century piece. So I think the more we are publishing on this and the more we're disseminating information, the more people are coming forward and saying, would you like to come and look at my head? I've got it in a box somewhere. And
have you found any that have turned out to be completely inauthentic?
Not yet.
That's possible?
It's possible. I mean, 1 or 2 of these pieces, it was suggested that they are products of the Grand Tour. Someone came back in 1780 with a battered head and thought, why have I got this with me? And then just threw it away. So it's not actually, it's not something that's come to Britain in Roman times. It's actually a later import that's been discarded. I think, going to all the effort of lugging a large, very badly weathered head all the way from Italy, you wouldn't do it. You would take the really nicely well-preserved, easily identifiable piece. I think the battered heads that we're seeing are Roman, Romano-British examples, and they did stand up here, and they did weather, and they were buried here. But there's been a tendency to dismiss most of them and say, oh, they're just sort of poor quality imports and they've only been here for 200 years, where the reality is that no, they were here in Roman Britain. But yeah, there's certainly more to be found.
Well, it's almost hard to imagine the sense of just how much some of that as kind of iconography locally would have dominated, you know, how much we would have seen.
Yeah.
It's remarkable that it would have come all the way from Rome at such speed, really,
Yes.
considering from the lifetimes of
And I think it does highlight the fact that Britain actually was quite a significant province. The cost of sending all this, transporting all this material. I mean, most emperors only last 5 or 6 years, so we might be seeing, you know, every 5 or 6 years another series of portraits comes over. It's a lot of effort, it's a lot of expense, and it does really suggest that there was an attempt to integrate Britain fully into the Roman Empire.
So I'm intrigued. It's not about the 3D modelling bit. There must have been a production line.
Yes.
Some sort of mass chipping.
Yeah, somewhere in Italy there's a great big pile of chippings.
Or we haven't worked it out yet. They were renameing photographs and doing it locally, and we've missed that bit out. But that was a hell of a production line.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they're very good at recycling as well. There's good instances. I showed you earlier, there's a picture of the Emperor Trajan standing, where was it? One way. In this particular statue, you can't see it terribly well in that image, but his head is too small for his body. That is a body of an earlier emperor, and they've removed the head and they've stuck the new head on. They're probably doing that quite a lot. So there is a production line in creating the portraits, but there's probably far less sort of actual full body figures around the empire, and you just keep switching them every time someone changes. But somewhere in Italy, probably somewhere near the marble quarries, there's probably an immense series of spoil heaps of chippings or statues that went wrong.
Gravestone or something.
Probably, yes. Yeah.
It does give a bit of an insight into sort of the process and how, as Marge was saying, how embedded Britain was and other provinces were in the whole sort of state system of the Roman Empire. There's almost something quite comical as well. It's like, all right, the new head, off it, you leave it off and then put it back on. I think it's quite a nice little insight, a little touch to sort of everyday.
And some
Roman
instances
life.
you get sort of a larger than life portrait like that, rather than taking it off, they just recarve it. So you sometimes get an emperor's face with someone else's hairdo. And they haven't bothered to change the hair, but the face is slightly smaller than the head. And there is also that strange aspect. We haven't encountered any of the British examples yet of just recarving the portrait and to see whether there's any trace of the earlier personalities still surviving. But that's a possibility if we get to look at some continental examples.
So who do you think commissioned most of them? Were they used as a way of kind of impressing the Roman Empire onto kind of Britain? Do you know what I mean? Like, would they have been a bit the most obvious visual way of everybody knowing absolutely that that's what they were part of?
It's difficult to say. There's no record of how these were done. I presume that there are key portraits are sent out. The emperor and the government are very keen that all the provinces know who's in charge. But it could well be that various towns, they are actually paying for a statue to arrive, that they want to be seen to be Roman. And some of the statues that we've seen, the one from Leicestershire, which seems to be carved out of a local form of limestone, that is manufactured in Britain. So it could be you've got a local community who've seen a statue of Nero and want one for themselves. They can't afford to get one over from Italy, so they commission a sculptor to knock one up with those sort of characteristics.
Do you think significance in using local material? Do you think that would have hit something else home, like using like a local stone? Do you think that's too far?
I think that might be too far. I mean, I suppose there's a real sense if you're Roman, you want marble, you want the best. So they might have been carving out of local limestone and then sort of pretending it's marble. I suppose once it's painted, you won't really know.
No.
So I don't suspect that they're deliberately using local resources.
Okay. Any more for any more? I think on that note, we'll say an enormous thank you. Absolutely fascinating.